Okay, now we're live. Eka, take it away.
Thank you, Jen. Hello, my name is Eka Kapiotis, and I'm here on behalf of the Front Royal Women's Resource Center for our Woman Gathering. And I see we have quite a few women gathering, and some men will be coming. We're kind of excited about that. Not, for the usual reasons, but just because. Anyway, add a little more energy to our group. So we're happy about that. And I'm very tickled to have Christine Andreae here to talk about her latest book called Searching for a Sister Lost at Sea. It's really a fascinating book full of illustrations and your very personal story. And for those of you who don't know about Christine Andreae, she's a founding member of the Front Royal Women's Resource Center, a very involved partner with the organization, very supportive, and she's also an activist, one of the founders for Scenic 340, into conservation, an author, an artist, shown at the Corcoran, a very amazing artist. So we're really honored to have her in our community and have her here talking about her book tonight. So, welcome, Christine.
Oh, thank you, Eka. That's very
Can we
generous.
Put this down or just hold it?
Wait, just put it down here.
Okay. Sorry. That's okay.
There you go, that'll work.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Welcome.
so
Yeah.
talk a bit about my book here. I've called it "Searching for a Sister Lost at Sea," and back in 1977, my youngest sister, whose name was Mercy, her full name was Mercedes, but she was named after my grandmother, who was also Mercedes. Mercy was picked up she was in Jackson, Wyoming. Don't forget, 1970, sort of high hippie time. She was working in a belt buckle factory, then she was baking bread, she was living sort of hand to mouth, and she picked up her backpack and decided to see the Pacific. And so she got on a freighter and she went to Tonga and Fiji, or Fiji first actually, then Tonga, and never came back. She just disappeared. The letters that she had been writing home to my mother just stopped about November. By January, my mother was pretty sure that something dreadful had happened to her, because they'd been having a very intimate exchange of letters. My sister was sending home a kind of a spiritual questing journal to my mother about her search for life, the meaning of life. So that was in 1977. My mother, there was, of course, nothing conclusive. My father went to search for her. At some point, I think it was at Easter the following year, my mother said, "Enough is enough, we're going to have a funeral." So that was how it turned out in our family. There was a lot of conflict about it. My father did not want my sister Mercy to go. He thought a young woman shouldn't be traveling like that on her own. He had very conventional, almost 19th century ideas of the way women should behave and what they should do, and they should settle down and get married, and very conventional ideas. And my mother, who herself had been married at age 19 and had me at 20, was very supportive of Mercy's desire to travel. And she was very supportive of Mercy seeing the world, and she said there's nothing wrong with that. And after Mercy disappeared, she'd say she could have been killed crossing the street. There was nothing morally wrong with it, so I did not oppose it. But needless to say, this put a big rift between my parents, the attitudes. So, my dad died in 1996, and after he died, my mother gave me this manila folder that was full of notes and telegrams and letters from embassies that sort of was left over from his search for her. Because when she was missing, he did go out. He flew out to Tonga to try and find out what had happened to her. To New Zealand, he talked to the New Zealand Search and Rescue. He was really obsessive about it for a long time. And his sort of obsessive search was another thing that alienated my parents, because he was not at all available for my mother. And he, in fact, almost blamed my mother for quote, letting her go. He felt that if she had put her foot down and said, Mercy, you can't go, that maybe she wouldn't have gone, which was not true, because Mercy did whatever she wanted. She was a very independent, feisty, again the government, as Mom would say. So anyway, I had all this material. I have to say, I'm the oldest of 9 children. Mercy was the youngest, the second from the youngest. We had the youngest is a brother. And I didn't really know her. She was born when I was 17. I was going off to college. I had absolutely no interest in this child that my mother had. She was very cute, but that's fine. I would come home and here's this cute little towhead running around, but I didn't have any real connection or interest in her. So when she disappeared, my focus was really more with my mother's grief and what my mother was going through and trying to sort of figure out what had happened. After my dad died and I had all this material, my mother also gave me copies of, not copies, but she gave me Mercy's actual letters that she had written home. And she also gave me the letters that she had written to Mercy that had all been returned to her, addressee unknown. They were general delivery, Suva, Fiji, whatever, these airmail envelopes, and they all came back. And my mother never read them again, but she didn't want to throw them out either. So I had those. So that was the material I had. And so as I began to, about 10 years ago, try to write this story, being a writer, that's sort of how I process stuff. But I also sort of felt, as I said, it was really important to have a record of what had happened so it just didn't all dissipate and get kind of underground. I wanted my grandchildren, my oldest granddaughter is named Mercy too, and when she was born, my son said, do you think it would be okay if we named her Mercy? Is that going to be bad luck? And I said, no, I don't think so, because it was also my grandmother's name, and I was very close to my grandmother. So, anyway, so I did want to make this complete. As a writer and as a published author, my publisher was St. Martin's Press. I had an agent. I was writing murder mysteries. Many of the drafts, I at some point I started showing some of the material that I was putting together for this, and I don't know why, but this is maybe just egoism. I can't imagine why they didn't want to publish it. But they kept saying, oh, Christine, it's not commercially viable. So I tried different agents, I tried different publishers, and everybody said, oh, no, it's not really commercially viable. So, that's code for something, but I don't know what it's code for. Maybe it's code, you aren't famous enough. Maybe it's code for, oh, you haven't battled with drug addiction and your father didn't sexually molest you. Memoirs, or memoirs have been oversold. That was another thing that I got. So at some point, I just decided I had to do it myself. And that gave me a lot of freedom. So I was able to put together a kind of an album format, use a lot of family pictures, my sister's letters are transcribed in here. There's artwork, maps, charts, a lot of stuff that makes the narrative a little more full. And at least so it's like there's 3 narrative threads. And as a writer, that was kind of interesting to do, to have a pictorial thread that went through it that could be kind of ironic, perhaps, commentary, like where I would talk about, in the narrative, about the difficulties that my parents were having in their marriage. I could put a picture of them being very happy together to try and balance the thing and make it feel whole. Or who knew where Tonga and Fiji were, you know? I mean, not me. And in fact, I remember one of the first things when Mercy went missing was my mother had the big National Geographic atlas out on the dining room table and was sort of following, you know, we were all trying to follow where she was and figure out where Tonga was, where what's the relationship to New Zealand, what's the relationship, how many miles, nautical miles to Australia, you know, all these different, what are the drift patterns, all these different aspects of it. So I wrote the thing, and then at the end of it I started to do some homework, really, more homework. And I actually traced down what had happened was that she had hopped on hitched a ride on an orange catamaran sometime in November. And it was, the captain was an ex-American airline pilot. He had a young girlfriend who was Polynesian, and there was a dental student from, I think it was Washington State, maybe Portland or maybe Seattle. I'm not sure where he was from, and my sister. So there were 4 people on the catamaran, and they all dropped off the face of the earth. So it wasn't just her. So that was another thread of the story.
And the boat was never found either?
The boat was never found. There were search and rescue operations.
So people did look for them?
People did look, yeah. And I think, you know, New Zealand Search and Rescue was wonderful, you know, and they put up with my father's daily phone calls. And they put up, you know, he was just like a dog with a bone. He wasn't going to let it go.
Yeah.
And let's see, I'm trying to think.
So about how long was it from the last time there was any known communication with Mercy or someone on that boat, and when people noticed that they might be missing?
It was before Thanksgiving. So it must have been, I think, it would be in here and I'd have to look it up. But I think it was like October, late October maybe, that Mom got a letter saying that she was going to go to New Zealand. They were setting out for New Zealand. It happened to be the beginning of the cyclone season. That they were setting out, and that she would obviously be in touch by Thanksgiving. So when Thanksgiving came around and Mom hadn't heard, they were overdue by Thanksgiving. Okay. And then some of the other people that they knew started raising the flag and saying, they're overdue, they're overdue. One of the things that really surprised me was that when Dad went out to search for her, the New Zealand, there was a young reporter for the New Zealand Herald, and she interviewed Dad. And my mother was very adverse to any kind of publicity. You know, it was sort of 19th century. A lady is not in the paper except for when she's married and her obituary. You know, that's it. But so here's this big article about my missing sister with her picture, and she looks, you know, and I've reproduced that in here too. She's, you know, I think there's cigarette smoke curling around her head. She looks kind of pouty and
bohemian
and pouty, and you know, I don't know. It's hard to describe the word, but when I looked at the thing, the headline was that she was missing. But the lead of the article was that here was this rich man who'd come out from Connecticut which is where we lived, for Connecticut to look for his daughter. That was the surprise. People disappeared in the Pacific all the time. And that was not news, that a boat was overdue, that somebody had been lost. So they don't know whether it was a cyclone, whether the boat went down in a cyclone. They don't know whether it was run down, got into a shipping lane, and was mowed down by one of these big Japanese freighters. They just don't know. My father got into some very dark ideas that I think are probably not true, but that she might have gotten picked up by the Japanese and sold as a sex slave, and that really worried him. There were strange phone calls. You know, when these things happen, all sorts of strangers call and say, oh, you know, they give misinformation or they make up a fantasy or whatever. It's very strange when you're I mean, I think of back to the Lindbergh kidnapping thing, and all what those parents had to put up with the publicity and so forth. So there was limited publicity with my sister going. It was just this one article. But and it was before the internet was very, I mean, obviously there were no internet cafes, or Mercy would have probably, been communicating that way. But
so are you saying that there were trolls back then too?
I think so. Yeah, I don't think it's a different kind. You know,
Right.
These were telephone calls that came.
Wow.
So I don't know.
That would be really hard.
I think it was really hard on Mom, and I think she just sort of pushed that away. Didn't want to think about it. She was a very strong woman.
Right. Yeah. So she disappeared. Welcome. Come in. Fun place to sit.
So where were we?
Well, you were talking about what happened when you stopped hearing from her and you realized that there was a problem, or your parents realized that there was a problem. And I guess, does anybody have any questions I could ask?
Yes.
It's been killing me. But
Oh no.
I probably heard this, but it didn't register. How old was she when she went missing?
She was 20.
Okay.
She was 19. It was 20.
Okay,
She was
thank you.
in that time.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I know that some of you have probably. I know Janet has written a memoir, and some of you have done family memoirs. But so you had a question.
Well, there was something similar on TV recently, and I was wondering if you had the police involved as well as the search and rescue.
The New Zealand police were involved. I went to try and find the records, but that was 1977, 1978, and they were all on paper, and everything had been digitalized since then. So a lot of the records were lost, and I had no idea of what they were. There was one of the sort of troll-like things that happened was at the end. Some people claimed that the boat had actually made landfall, and that people from the boat had been running drugs and were going from. It was an illegal landfall up in the north end of the. New Zealand has two islands, as you know. There was a very far north end. And that there were rumors that the boat had made landfall there, and the police investigated that and interviewed people. So I would have liked to have seen those, but there was just no way. The head of the New Zealand Maritime Search and Rescue was a very kind man, in that he put up with my dad. His name was Captain Hunt, and I couldn't find him either. I couldn't get a hold of him. But I think at the end he just got kind of fed up with these phone calls from Connecticut every day, every other day, and was almost maybe relieved when this report came in that the boat had made an illegal landfall, and whether it was true or not, it was an excuse for him to close the case, because if the boat had come into port, then it was no longer missing.
Oh,
Even though the people were
interesting.
missing?
Yeah.
I mean, okay.
Yeah.
So how far was Tonga from New Zealand? Was it in New Zealand's territory, do you know? Or
Let me look at my map here.
Sorry.
No, I have it all written out. It's from Tonga to New Zealand is 1,000 164 miles.
Okay. So they probably didn't have their New Zealand was probably in charge of their
Of the whole area.
Yeah, right.
They did search and rescue.
right, because that's a small island.
Right.
Tonga's a small island.
Well, look there on the map. It's tiny, but it's a lot of islands. Let me see. Can we put that on there?
Did you happen to ever travel there yourself?
No, I didn't. But my sister went recently. My sister Jessie, who was between Mercy and I, and she went on a Lindblad National Geographic tour of Tonga. She went by herself. She was trying to, and she had been quite close to Mercy, and I think this was for her a way of bringing it to conclusion. So she ended up seeing the places where Mercy had been, and the staff put her in touch with some of the relatives of the family that Mercy had stayed with before she disappeared in Tonga.
Wow.
Because when my father went out to Tonga to look for her, he had stayed with it. He had, tracked down this family in one of the remote northern islands. I guess Mercy was really into remote and primitive, and so they were up in the far end, no radios, very few resources, and he went up and stayed with them. And in the end, he ended up sending them some money, a modest amount, and in their gratitude, they ended up changing their youngest daughter's name to Mercy.
Wow.
So,
And how lovely that he had some memories of how the family thought of.
right. And then when my sister went just last year, she met a cousin, and there's a picture of my sister and the cousin of the Tongan Mercy in there, and she said it was very emotional for her, and that she really felt like she had made a closure for that.
Wow.
Do you think Jessie would have gone if it weren't for your book?
I don't know. I think so. I think it was something that she wanted to do for a long time, but my sister Jessie's not very organized, and she's very dyslexic, so she gets things mixed up, and we were asleep one night, and the phone rings, and of course, at this point in your life, if the phone rings in the middle of the night, you think something bad has happened, and it's Jessie, and she's saying, "Oh, hi, I'm in Fiji. Do you have the name of that family?" And I'm going, Jessie, where are you? So I said, I'll call you back in another, 6 hours, Jess. And she apologized. She'd gotten the time thing because she's not into numbers, and she'd done the math wrong.
So has most of your family been receptive to you doing this, or have some of them been like, yeah, that door is closed?
No, I think they were all pretty neutral about it in a way, but I don't think many of them will read it, actually.
Oh.
My sister, who's closest to me, I said and she has a bookstore, and I sort of thought, well, maybe she'd carry it in her bookstore, but she did not want to do that. And so recently I said, I know you're not comfortable with this book, because it's a family portrait. It's a family portrait with all the warts. And I don't dwell on the warts, but they're there.
Yeah.
And she said, no, it's so hard for me. She said, I was over there every day. She lived next door to my mother. I was down here in Virginia. We had little kids. And Sheila said she was over there every day, and that Mom was crying and crying every day. And that that was a reason she didn't really want to go back. On the other hand, my youngest brother, who was closest to Mercy, when he was like 15, he must have been, they were 2 years apart, so she was drinking age and he wasn't. And she would whisk him away out to bars and whatever to have a whiny, beery lunch with him. So they were quite close, and she was tough. She would take Tommy went out to see her. This is my youngest brother, Tommy, went out to see her when she was in Jackson, and they went winter camping together. And the white gas from the camping stove spilled into the oatmeal, and she insisted that he eat it. And she ate it, she cooked it up. She said, oh, it's not so bad. So she was pretty tough. So he was, and I had quoted him. I did actually go around and ask my brothers and sisters for memories of their time. So I put that in here.
Okay.
Tommy, he said, it was only a couple weeks ago, he said, I picked this up with great reluctance. I think he was afraid I was going to, not only going back to a sad time, but there was so many conflicts in my family. My mother had a problem with alcohol. There was a conflict between her and Dad. Dad was violent as a dad. He did not spare the rod or his hands. So there was a lot of difficulty, and I think he thought I was going to, capitalize on that or blow it up in some way. I don't know what he thought, but he just said he was so relieved and that it was really well researched and fair, and he said it was on target. So that made me feel good.
Did it bring you some closure with your? Did it?
Yeah, I think it did. As I say, I didn't really know her, and I didn't know who she was. So going through,
you probably got to know more about her.
I
by
did,
reading that book.
Absolutely. So it was a way of getting to know her. It was a way of beginning to understand my parents' marriage. Of thinking about what their contract would have been in 1941 when they were married, and how different it was from my expectations in 1967 of a marriage, and how that was a conflict for them at the end of their lives. She was very feminist, and he was very traditional.
Interesting.
Do you think he ever reached any resolution? I can't even say peace. Resolution with it before he died?
I think he kind of let it go. I remember not too long before he died, he came down and he was sitting on the sofa, and he'd sort of do this with his ring, and he'd kind of do this. And I said, Dad, is that, you still blame yourself for letting Mercy go? And he kind of shook his head, and he said, no. And I could see my mother perk up, sitting next to him and sort of waiting for his answer. And he just said, no, that was a long time ago. So I think he accepted that she was gone. I think he accepted that there was nothing he could have done, or that he did everything that he could. I don't really like the word closure. It's like a door and then it's gone. It's more, that doesn't, I don't know. I don't know what the right word is, but maybe acceptance is a better word. And I think he accepted it. And even though you don't really know what something is, you can still accept that you don't know it and live with that.
I find it fascinating that you're talking about that you didn't want it to just disappear, because I've recently been studying about what happens in ancestral DNA. So, when there's a trauma in the family, it affects the DNA and the expression of the DNA, and it doesn't matter if that person died or whatever, it still actually shows up. They're showing this, and it gets passed down. Those epigenetic changes, this would be another discussion, get passed down at least 3 generations.
Yeah.
And they said that when it's not discussed, when things are, put away, that has a much bigger effect. So in reading this and looking at my own family, my favorite word right now is reconciliation. It's sort of like, how do you reconcile and look at all the different, dynamics of what happened, and kind of reconcile that. It's not really closure, but you come to accept it, and
Right.
it's like you can make your own inner landscape large enough that you can see how the different people were interacting and how it's affected you.
Yeah, and I think, for my grandchildren's generation, if they can read this and understand some of the past, that maybe it'll be like a signpost or an understanding of some of the decisions that they might have to make. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but that was the hope. That was the, it used to be that if you published your own memoir, that it was Vanity Press that did it. but now things have changed, and so with the idea that it would be of use to future generations in my family made me feel that it wasn't a vanity exercise.
Yeah.
So,
And I do want to say that although Christine is talking about this one part about her sister, you have a fascinating family history, and it's really so much more interesting. I mean, this is a fascinating story, and I think we all, it pulls at all of our hearts in some way, and the history of your family is just fascinating.
well,
And very complicated.
it's very
and-
complicated. That's why I
Yeah.
put a chart at the beginning, and I did find I had to go back so that I could understand my father and I could understand my mother better, to go back to generations. So there's pictures of the great-grandmothers on both sides. And interestingly, my father's mother and my mother's mother, both of their mothers died early. So both mothers really didn't have any mothering models. So I kind of thought, well, that was sort of significant that that may have accounted for some of the conflicts and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're gonna. We'll take a few more questions.
I was just struck with the fact about somebody who disappears, and what a different narrative that makes. Actually, the narrative ends. You don't have the continuing story, and I just wondered. I don't know, just how.
Well, I think my mother was really very brave, because at some point when she said she felt that the connection between her and Mercy was broken, and she felt that she knew. I don't know if one of my children died, if I would feel that or not. I would hope I would, but she said she did, and so I believe her in that. And then at some point she said, okay, this is it, we're going to have a funeral. And first it was just going to be the immediate family, and then she decided, no, they had to ask, everybody, have it be a proper thing and the notice go out. Because even several years later, people would come up to her and say, well, don't worry, she'll show up. This kind of thing. So
That's
she,
the worst thing, not knowing.
Yeah.
so she needed to make an end and say, this is it.
My father died in a foreign country
Uh-huh.
with his second wife, and we never got a death certificate. I got a phone call, and it was 10 days before my youngest was born. And we never got closure, and we couldn't even put anything in the paper, because you cannot put a death notice or anything in the paper without a death certificate. So there was never really any closure. So
Yeah.
well, I know you don't like that word, but I couldn't even.
No,
put
but
a
I
piece of it,
understand.
So,
Yeah.
Any other questions? Because we've run a little over, which is fine, because it's so fascinating. Yeah, everybody's nodding. Yes. Any other questions? Okay, I know that there are. But so, Christine, how can people get your book?
Oh, you can go on my website, and it's ChristineAndreae.com. I don't know how to. It's Andreae. It's like the girl's first name with an extra E on it. So if you go www.ChristineAndreae.com, it'll take you to a page, and you'll see the cover of the book. Shall we give a cover shot of it here?
Dun, dun, dun.
Da-da.
There's how you spell it.
Thank you.
Yeah, because you're not.
How long did it take you to write it?
About 10 years.
Yeah.
on and off,
Yeah.
putting, I mean, there were many, many,
There's a
many
lot
drafts.
of research to do.
And the research, yeah.
And of course, if people want to go on the Front Row Women's Resource website or on the Facebook page, you'll find a link to Christine's work and her name.
Yeah, and I think, Nan, did you donated one to the library?
Yes, that's
One at the library. There's a couple copies at the Royal Oak Bookshop, and online. So
On your website.
on my
We're
website.
not going to find this
No,
on
you're not going to
Amazon.
find it on Amazon. It was
Yeah.
too small an edition, really, for it to be for it to work out for Amazon.
Yeah.
So, but you'll get it very quickly if you get on my website.
There you go. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to
Thank
come
you,
and talk a
Eka.
bit about
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, and so we're going to turn it over to Lee Meyer to talk about the Front Row Women's Resource Center.
Okay, well, just a few things. For those of you who don't know, the Women's Resource Center is celebrating our 20th year as a nonprofit organization. And we are very proud of the work we've done supporting Warren County women and middle school girls. We have given out over $100,000 in grants and scholarships. So that is a great milestone for us. So we have a series of events. I won't go into all of them, but we do have monthly woman gatherings, and we have monthly luncheons, networking luncheons. The next one will be next week, Wednesday, April 25th, right in this space at 11:30. Everybody brings their lunch, socialization, but our speaker will be Leslie Hardesty. She runs the Laurel Center, which is for victims of sexual violence. It's probably more well known in Winchester, but they're establishing a presence here in Front Royal. And if you've been by the courthouse, this is Sexual Violence Awareness Month, and they have a display there of all these flags of all the victims of sexual violence that they have helped. So that should be an interesting talk with Leslie. And then the next Woman Gathering, which is going to be different, normal night, May 17th, will be at the library, but we're doing our Spotlight program. This is an annual program spotlighting women in our community. In the past, it's been a single woman, but this year it's going to be at least 4 women who have really done a lot and also faced challenges in our community, and it is called Women Rising. So I hope you'll look for that. We'll be putting out more information. That will be, as I said, on May 17th at Samuel's Library at 6 o'clock. And thank you all for coming tonight. Absolutely. And thank you so much for Christine.
Oh, thank you, Lee. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Christine. And thanks, Jen Avery, our intrepid videographer. And Jen will also, or Tina will make sure that this video is put not only on a link to the website. Right now it will be on the Front Row Women's Resource Center, which is FRWRC. On Facebook, it will be there as a live event, but it will also end up on YouTube. So if you know people that would be interested in these programs, but they don't do Facebook, we have a way that they can see it on YouTube. There'll also be a link on the website, which is frwrc.org. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and also to Beth Waller, and for allowing us to use her space, Open House Meet in the Middle. We very, very greatly appreciate it. And thank you so much again, Jen. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.